Good morning, everybody. I hope everybody can hear me okay. Welcome to today's webinar. I'm Steph from Simply Rhino, and I'd like to welcome you all to the fourth webinar in our series of 6 webinars focused on the use of V-Ray 2 for Rhino. This fourth webinar will give an overview of setting up an exterior architectural scene. 3 methods of lighting will be examined, starting with using the Rhino Sun, which is now fully integrated into V-Ray 2.0. Using the physical camera and choosing an appropriate GI solution will also be demonstrated, and other topics will be examined, including using the V-Ray Sun, loading the Sun system into the environment, using the dome light and HDRI, controlling the V-Ray physical camera, and choosing an appropriate GI solution. The webinar should last approximately 30 minutes, and our presenter is Phil Cook. Phil is an experienced product design professional and senior trainer here at Simply Rhino. He's responsible for our advanced and bespoke training. The 5th webinar in this series, in which we will look at an architectural interior, is on Wednesday the 5th of November. More details on what we intend to cover are on the webinar series page of the Simply Rhino website. Registration will open soon. This webinar is being recorded so you can watch it again. It will be posted on our YouTube channel, and a link to that is available on our dedicated webinar page, again on the Simply Rhino website. As we progress through the presentation today, please do type any questions you may have and send to us. You may have an answer directly within the chat, or it may be shared with the group later. There will be an official Q&A session following the software presentation. Thanks again to Chaos Group, Scan Computers and PNY for their assistance with these webinars. That's all from me for now. I'm going to hand over to Phil for the presentation. Phil, over to you.
Morning everybody, my name is Phil from Simply Rhino, and this morning we're going to take a look at lighting an architectural exterior scene. We're going to look at a number of different ways, 3 different ways of lighting the same scene. One of the things about V-Ray, as I'm sure you're aware or beginning to understand, is that there are always lots of different ways of doing similar setups, and we're going to look, as I say, at 3 distinctly different ways of lighting an exterior scene. So first of all, we've got a fairly simple model here of an architectural exterior. This has been primarily modeled as a solid. We've got a few interior components, and if we were to just look at creating just an RT render of this here, we'd see that we are at default settings here in terms of the background and the environment that's being used. So we're starting from defaults, which now in V-Ray 2.0 is an environmental lighting setup with a couple of images in place in the environment and in the skylight. So let's look first of all at using the Rhino document Sun. This is Rhino's own Sun system that we're going to load in. So to do this, I first of all go to my panels and I go to Sun and I turn the Sun on. Then I make sure that manual control here is unchecked, and I'm going to set the Sun position by location here. So I'm going to set this for Tokyo, and I'm going to set the time for 17th of August, earlier on this year, at 3:30 in the afternoon. And of course, one of the benefits of using the Rhino Sun is that even in the Rhino rendered viewport here, we can see where our shadows are going to be. So it gives us a very easy setup. Okay, so having turned on the Rhino Sun and placed it, our next step is to load the Rhino document Sun into our environment in V-Ray. So we go to the option editor and we load the sun into the skylight, and we also load the sun into the background. So the sun is a combined sun and sky system, so the sun goes into the skylight, the sky goes into the background. So we click on the M symbol here, we choose Text Sky, and we choose Rhino Document Sun. Now we have a number of, or 3 different sky models here. The CIE clear model is the default, but here I'm going to change to the Pretum model. Okay, there's a particular reason why we're doing this, and we'll explain more later on. Do exactly the same thing in background, so Text Sky, Rhino Document Sun, and set this to Pretum, and OK this. Then what I'm going to do is to use a couple of the V-Ray presets. I'm going to use an exterior preset here and set this to low quality exterior. Check that. And then I'm going to choose a camera preset, and I'm going to set this to clear sky. Okay, so what the camera presets are doing is basically all they're doing is controlling the exposure, and we've got a couple of scenarios here: after sunset, before sunset, clear sky, cloudy bright, cloudy sky, etc. So these are kind of starting points for setting a camera exposure. And let's look at an RT render now. We can just get this to catch up. This might just take a couple of seconds to start doing something. There we go. And you'll now see that we have the sky in place, and we get our sharp shadows from the sun. Okay, so what we can do now is, or one of the things that we can demonstrate is that the Rhino Document Sun actually is hooked up to V-Ray RT now. So if I go back to my sun panel here and I change the time of day, then you'll see the sky darken and the shadows move in the V-Ray RT window. Now, of course, if we move too far on in the day, then we may need to adjust our exposure. But you can see here that this is a fairly nice way of doing a sun study just in front of the client, is just to use V-Ray RT and let this resolve. And of course, if we want to, for example, put any interior lights on our scene and pull the exposure down to dusk or something a little after this, then we can start to do visuals, night or late afternoon visuals where we're lighting the interior of our scene. So V-Ray RT and the Rhino Document Sun now fully connected, and this is a very fast way of lighting a scene. Now, the reason we use the Pretum Sun model is that the sky actually darkens with the Pretum Sun model, whereas when we use the CIE model, the sky gets to a certain amount of darkness and then it doesn't get any further. But there are other compelling reasons why the CIE model is useful in other situations. Okay, so let's set this back to sort of somewhere where we were before, around about 3:30, and then let's have a look at a couple of other things that we can do here. If you are not a fan of the sharp shadows that the sun creates, then we can soften these, and we can soften the shadows by increasing the size of the sun. So we can do this by going to our environment, going to our skylight here, and increasing the size of our Rhino document sun. When we do this, we don't affect the brightness of the sun like we do when we increase the size, for example, of a rectangular light at the default scalar settings. The size of the sun and the brightness are treated as being independent, and we should be able to see now that we are getting softer shadows from the sun. And this is a kind of a personal thing, how you want to set this up. There's no hard and fast rules. You can soften the shadows or you can keep them sharp, but the way to do it is to increase the size of the sun. Now, we also mentioned that we were using the physical camera. The physical camera is turned on by default now in V-Ray, and it's absolutely essential to use the physical camera when you are using the sun and sky system. The V-Ray sun is very bright, and of course it's not physically correct to turn down the brightness of the sun. So one controls the brightness of the scene by controlling the exposure of the physical camera. Now, we started by using presets here, but these are good for a start, but if we want to fine-tune the exposure, then there are a number of settings that we can use here. And these are, first of all, the shutter speed. Excuse me. Now, the shutter speed here is when we see, as in this case, a shutter speed of 200. That is the inverse of the shutter speed. So what this means is 1 over 200, so 1/200th of a second. So larger values here will give us a faster shutter speed, therefore a darker image. We can also use the F number to control the exposure. The F number is the aperture control, and this uses, again, the same metaphor as a real camera does. So, for example, F16 is an aperture that is lets in that is one stop slower than F8, so F8 lets in twice as much light as F16. Now, of course, the shutter speed and the F number are, if you are not that familiar with photography, are not that straightforward to control. Whereas the film speed here, which is the third way that we can control the exposure of the image, as this is an ISO setting, this is a fairly simple proposition to use. Essentially here, if we use a film speed of 100 and we change that to 200, the 200 film speed is twice as fast and it lets in twice as much light. And if we reduce the film speed conversely to 50, we're letting in half as much light. So it's a very simple kind of linear expression here to work out how we might control the exposure. So, for example, I can just reduce the film speed here to 90, for example, and we can make a very, very slight change to the exposure in the scene, and the white concrete here of our building won't be quite as washed out. So the starting point for setting the camera probably is best to use the presets and then move on to using either the shutter speed, the F number, or the film speed. One more thing that we can turn on in the physical camera is vignetting, which is the darkening of the image at the edges. Again, I tend to have this set to do nothing when I start a scene, because the vignetting can become quite dark and can affect the overall exposure in the scene. Okay, so this is the first method I wanted to look at, which is using the Rhino Sun system. Okay, so second way that we can set up an exterior scene, and again we're starting from the same default settings here, is to use V-Ray's sun angle calculator, which is here. Now this is similar in many respects to the Rhino Sun angle calculator, but there are a couple of significant differences to it. Both of these are physically correct, and they both will adopt the same sun models. But essentially, it's the interface that's different to them, and this makes one sun system better for some things and the other better for others. And I'll try and explain as we go along. So to load in a sun with the V-Ray sun system, we click on the sun setting here, and we get to the V-Ray sun angle calculator. We uncheck manual control, and once again I can set my location to Tokyo, and I can set my time of day to the 17th of August, I think it was, and 3:30 in the afternoon. Okay, and then I have one additional step now, is that my cursor changes into a crosshair, and I have to actually just place the physical sun. Now, it doesn't matter where in the scene the direct light symbol, which is the metaphor for the V-Ray sun, is placed. All that we are wanting to achieve with this is a vector direction. So it doesn't matter whether the sun's down here, up here, or is parallel with the ground plane. It's merely a vector direction. So this is just a very simple metaphor to control the sunlight. So once again, we need to load this into our V-Ray environment. So I'll go to my V-Ray options, go to environment, and load in text sky. And this time I choose Sun 1 rather than Rhino document Sun. Again, I'm going to use the Pretum sky model here, and I'm going to load in the same here into my environment. Okay, I'm also going to go to exterior and low quality exterior, and camera and clear sky. And let's look at an RT render from here. And again, hopefully when this kicks in, this should be exactly the same result that we had previously. Here we go. Okay, so you can see the lighting is exactly the same, sun direction is the same. So same physical model is used for both suns. Now, the reason why the Rhino document sun and the V-Ray sun are useful in their own ways is that if you are perhaps wanting to simulate a scene that's set in a precise location, then the fact that the Rhino document sun is hooked into V-Ray RT means that you can merely change the time of day or the date in the year with the sun angle calculator, and your sun will update accordingly to a physically correct position. But if you are looking at doing something which is more closely or less closely physically accurate, but you want to do something which just looks good from the purpose of a visual, then the ability to actually manipulate the direct light source that is a representation of the sun is really useful, because I no longer now have to worry about working out what's the correct time of day to get a proper result here. I can, for example, move the sun so that it comes round from the back of the house. Okay, so we just move this around here, and then I can just move these windows out of the way here. I can just drop the sun down a little as well. So with the direct light here, once it gets kind of close to being parallel with the ground plane, then fairly obviously the sun starts to go down. We can actually see the sun in the sky here. And we can push this down a little bit more. Okay, and you'll see the sky starting to darken. So again, this is a nice direct way of being able to create an image, but to actually control the lighting directly here. Okay, so once again, you know, if we turn on our lights now and we drop just the sun slightly further here to darken the sky. Okay, clearly the sun's on its way down now at sunset. Okay, so it's much more direct control over the lighting. So if you're doing a visual just for the sake of visualization and you want to just get something that looks good rather than something that represents a physically accurate position, then the V-Ray Sun is a nice way of doing this. We can get some really nice kind of colors going on in the sky here as well with the with both suns, because of course they both hook into the same sun model. Okay, so finally the third way that we can look at lighting a scene is to use the dome light and an HDR image. So let's look at a scene here. So once again, we're starting from default settings, and let's look at bringing in a dome light. So I just want to check first of all that I am at defaults here, and I've overridden my viewport. And I'm going to look at bringing in a V-Ray dome light. Now, the dome light is the same dome light that we used for lighting a product, and the important thing to remember with the dome light is that the dome that we see here, that's a representation of the light source itself, is again just a metaphor for the light source. So the size of this is irrelevant. The size and position of this is largely irrelevant to your scene. We can edit the dome light by going to the light properties in our Rhino properties here, and the one thing I want to enable here is that I need to give this dome light a dome texture. So I click inside Use Dome Texture, and then I set open the texture editor and choose text bitmap. And then I'm going to load in an HDR image from here, which is called Cloudy Dawn, and I'm going to set the texture mapping to environment, and again choose spherical for the mapping type here. You can preview the texture in here and OK this. Okay, sorry, we went to the wrong. Right, okay, so we've got the texture loaded in. Now, just going to do a couple of other things here. I'm going to once again use some presets to control the quality. So exterior and low quality exterior. And then I am going to go to my camera settings here, which controls the exposure, and I'm going to set this to cloudy sky. And the other thing that I'm going to do, well, actually, let's just render out a test scene here. Again, I'm going to use RT to do this. Okay, so just takes a while sometimes for RT to kick in. Okay, so we'll now see that my scene is starting to illuminate here. Possibly one of the things that we need to do here is to lighten this scene. Now we could do this a couple of ways. We could increase the multiplier for the HDR image, and of course we can go back to the exposure and set that as well. But of course increasing the multiplier for the HDR image is a fairly simple way of doing this. Now I should point out probably that to use HDRs for exterior environmental lighting, then you really need a high quality HDR image that has enough levels of exposure in it to be able to capture the bright values of the sun without burning out the rest of the HDR. And probably the HDR that we have here is adequate, but it's not fantastic. So, but it's good enough to give you a quick run through of how things work here. So, one of the easy things about using an HDR is, of course, we get a background and a sun position that are related to each other. So it's a very quick way of working. Now, if I want to actually move the sun around, to move the HDR image around, then I don't do this by actually rotating the dome light, because the dome light is just a metaphor. What I need to do is to select the dome light, go to my light properties, and go to the dome texture and actually rotate the dome texture itself. So here I'm going to rotate the dome texture through 90 degrees in the horizontal. This will have the effect of bringing the light round to the front of the scene. But of course this also rotates the sky. Now, if you are in the position where you want to move the light, but you kind of like the sky where it was previously, then you can do this. You can make the dome light invisible, which means we'll see the light from the dome light, but not the dome texture in the background. And then we can go to our V-Ray options, and in environment, in background here, we can actually load up the same texture, so cloudy dawn, and set this to environment and spherical. So we load up exactly the same texture, but this time we don't rotate it, so we leave the sky in the position that it was. I set the multiplier to the same value that I've got here, so my sky is equally as bright as the light that's being created, and then I can again do an RT render, and now that we should see that the sky, when this eventually kicks in, that the sky returns to its original position. There we go. Okay, so now we've got the lighting from the front of the building and the sky in its original position. So once again, this is a kind of a reasonably quick and straightforward way of lighting a scene. Okay, so a couple of other things just finally that we can do is that if you remember again from the product scene, is that the thing that most influences the quality of a scene when we're using a dome light is the number of subdivisions, and I'm going to set this from the default of 8 and increase it to 32. And the other thing that I'm also going to do here is, because we've got an exterior scene where we are seeing quite a lot of the interior of the building, I'm actually going to change my secondary bounces from brute force to light cache. Okay, and I'm going to just reset my low quality exterior here. And so when we use light cache for secondary bounces, we're actually calculating many more secondary bounces of light. So this should let us see slightly better into the building and calculate more of the indirect illumination that's going on inside there. So I'll just leave this to render out. I'll do a production render of this, and while this is rendering, we can hand back to Steph and Paul for any questions.
Great, thank you very much, Phil. Okay, we've had some questions come through, so what I'll do now is I'll introduce Paul, and he can come over to you, Phil, with some of the questions.
Okay.
Paul, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Okay, yeah, thanks, Phil. There's just a couple of questions. If anyone else wants to forward any questions, now's the time to do that, and we'll try and get through as many as we can. A few questions from Rob. First one is, what does the overcast setting produce? The overcast setting in the environment panel.
Do you mean the overcast in the camera presets?
Well,
I think it probably does. That here in our camera presets here, no, he doesn't mean there. Let's have a look. I think he means this in the
sun
setting.
That's it.
Okay,
That's it. Yes.
Right. Okay. So in sun here, let's have a look. Where I'm not quite sure where he means here, but this is sorry, which is the HDR that we're looking at here. So we're looking at the wrong scene. Let's just. Oh, do you mean there's a CIE clear and a CIE overcast setting? I think that's what he means in the sun. That's just a different sun setting. So it's a clear sky and a cloudy
exactly
sky.
That.
Yes. So the color of the light will be slightly different, slightly dirtier, and of course it won't be as bright if it's overcast rather than clear. So there are two CIE models. Now the CIE models differ from the preterm model in that the sky doesn't darken fully when the sun goes down, but there are advantages to this, and we'll look at this when we look at some interior renderings, because it's easier to control a value called horizontal illumination with the CIE models, where we can artificially boost illumination without brightening the sun, and this is a really good way of lighting interiors. So yeah, the CIE overcast is just a different sky model, and it's using effectively a cloudy model rather than a clear sky model.
Okay, next question from Rob was, when you enlarge the sun, does it show up bigger in the render?
Yes, it will do. Yes, if the sun is in the background, yes. But you can control that separately as well and make that visible or not visible.
Great. Okay. Again, Rob, how does one know if the HDRI is good quality?
Well, generally, if you have got it professionally, i.e. you've paid for it, then there's probably a better chance of it being good quality than something you've got for free from the internet. But essentially what happens is if you can make the HDR bright enough to light with, but it's not bleaching out kind of areas of detail, then the HDR's got enough brightness levels in it to light with. An HDR image is essentially comprised of the same image at a number of different exposures. So if you think about black being 0 and white being 1, then the HDR image has values over 1, which are brighter than white, and it's those values that you use to light with. Now, some of the more kind of consumer-based HDRs, let's say, ones that you can download freely on the internet, kind of don't have an awful lot of tonal range in them. And whereas the more professional ones tend to be much more useful for this sort of situation. And where this would affect a scene like we're looking at the moment is not the overall lighting, which in this scene is okay, but probably the way that we'd be able to produce sharp shadows from the bright spots in the HDR.
Okay. Question from Gerard.
Yes.
He's noticed some people use two dome lights for lighting and reflection independently.
Yes.
Is there, and really asking, what's the best workflow?
Probably the
Depends on
simpler
your
ones are the best
situation.
workflow, but you can mix and match these settings. So you can use a dome light with the sun, for example. So you could use the sun for lighting, the dome light for background, and indeed, you know, we've been at presentations where people from Chaos have used 3 dome lights, one for the light, one for the background, one for the reflection. So there is plenty of scope here to mix and match, but there isn't really a best workflow. It's really what you're comfortable with using and what gives you the result that you are happiest with. One of the key things with V-Ray is that you've got this flexibility to do exactly that, to just have lots of different workflows. So whichever one works for you, I guess, is the best workflow.
Okay, question from Daisy. How can the topography be rendered so that the organic form of it is even clearer? And sort of linked to that, would you use the sun or another aspect of Rhino?
Okay, well, one of the benefits of using the sun is that the sun is very bright and it's also directional. So you get very strong shadows and you get a good definition. In this case of the building, you get good definition where we're looking at the steps and the edges of the building. And you can do this without having to really use anything above the default quality settings in V-Ray. So again, to show the form of landscape, the sun is going to give you a kind of a different look to using environmental lighting would do. So environmental lighting, where we're using primarily GI lighting, would give you, perhaps describe the form of the landscape or the topology better, but of course the sun is going to mean that it's more lifelike in terms of how it appears.
Okay. Okay, and what looks like the final question, from Rob. How could someone use the VFB channels to enhance the exterior scene?
Okay, well, you can render out quite a lot of stuff in the VFB channels, and you can take out light, shadows, reflections, all as separate channels, and the idea is that you can put those back together in Photoshop and you can use them as masks or as adjustment layers, and so you can increase the effect or the contrast in the shadows by playing with the shadow channel. You can affect reflections by playing with the shadow, by playing with the reflection channel. So there's all kind of sorts of things that we can do with the VFB channels to do that. So I think the best thing is to again just have a play and an experiment with those. But there are now lots of separate channels that we can take out from V-Ray. There is no overhead in terms of rendering time. All you need to do is to actually enable the channels before you render, and then you can capture those inside the frame buffer and save them all out in one go and load them back into Photoshop or whatever editor you're using.
Do they automatically get saved?
They get, no, you basically, we just go back to here. They will get saved in the frame buffer here. If I just bring up the frame buffer, you can save the different channels here. So here we've just got an alpha channel and an RGB channel. We can use this button to save the image that's in the frame buffer, or this button here with the multiple floppy disks on it to save all the image channels in one go. Okay, so they don't get automatically saved. What you need to do is you need to enable the channels here in your VFB channels. So for example, if I wanted to take out shadows here, I can move down to shadows. Here we go to shadow. I can enable that, and then when I render, the shadow channel will render out as well as the alpha and the RGB, and then I just save them all out using this icon here. Okay, and that saves out the all the images in one go.
Okay. Okay. Just lastly, someone's mentioned a tip for some good tutorials on checking for the quality of a HDRI image. A good site for that is cgarchitect.com.
Okay, cool. Great.
Okay. Other than that's it. So thanks, Phil.
Okay.
Just mention again that this has all been recorded, and like the previous 3 webinars, they'll all be available to view on the main webinar announcement page on our website.
Okay.
So thanks everyone for joining. Just a reminder that the next webinar, as you can see on that slide, is Wednesday the 5th of November. So we hope to see you all again then. Thanks for joining us. Oh, and any last emails, thoughts, questions, feel free to email us and we'll come back to you individually by email. So thank you everybody. Goodbye.
Thanks.